Today's program is brought to you by the number 40, as the Sesame Street characters used to say when my children were little. Do you remember that? Yeah. Well, the readings today are connected by that number 40. 40 years wandering around in the wilderness after Moses, and for Jesus, 40 days in the desert facing up to his future, and what you're hoping for, that I won't preach for 40 minutes. I'll try not to. Both the readings that we've just heard invite us into a period of remembering, facing who we are, facing our past, and then they invite us to face our future. That's Lent. The week preceding Ash Wednesday, which we've just celebrated, is known in many parts of the world as, or they have a carnivale, translated as meaning goodbye to meat. It was, in the past, the occasion for party going, for eating the last of the meat, and for remembering good times and fun in the midst of scarcity and dark. It was a celebration of life in the face of possible death. It was the period at the end of the winter months when food was getting scarce, when things were looking pretty miserable. We symbolically used up the last of our eggs to make pancakes on Shrove Tuesday. Lent, as we've come to know it, as that season in the liturgical calendar of the church, began about 300 CE after the Council of Nicaea. It was a time of self-discipline, of giving things up, of being aware of the frailty of human life. It made a virtue of necessity at the end of winter when food was scarce. When thinking about the 40 years, especially those 40 days, it helps to remember that fasting is a mechanism for inducing focus. It's a mechanism for inducing visions, for sharpening memories. It was not about self-denial for the sake of doing without. But it's easy for that tradition of doing without and fasting as a sign of our piety, that it's easy for that tradition of the church to get in the way of the gospel stories that we've heard today at the beginning of Lent. So we begin Lent today hearing an invitation to remember who we are, wandering Aramans. In other words, hearing an invitation to remember that our ancestors were once in need of hospitality and welcome in a strange land. For those of us who are of European descent, our forebears in this country were provided that hospitality by people very different from themselves. The Maori people of this land provided welcome hospitality in the first instance. Perhaps this points us towards an attitude of hospitality to refugee and migrant people arriving in Aotearoa, New Zealand in our time. Perhaps we're being encouraged to open our hearts, even though we might be fearful our culture and even our way of speaking will change in ways we can't imagine or hope to control. We also hear in the readings for this first Sunday in Lent a provocation to be thankful, to embrace, as they say, an attitude of gratitude. It's good to bring into focus aspects of our lives that induce a sense of gratitude in us. It's good to bring into focus our vision of how great the world could be with its diversity of peoples, abundant food resources, and even its capacity to regulate our excesses, if we'll let it. It's good to take time to be aware of how we, each of us, can live so that our vision of that world can shape the future. At the same time that we recall all of this, we recall other stuff, things that we're not proud of. These times act as a caution, reminding us of how easy it is to be seduced by promises of things to come, by dreams of self-aggrandizement, of overabundance, to be seduced by hope in something different from what we have. It's all too easy to fall into a feeling of dissatisfaction with our lot, to want to hold on to the popular "I deserve it" mindset. I was somewhat shocked by an advertisement for a school that I saw this week, where there is a young man in uniform standing like this. Above him was the world balanced on his hand. The caption read, "The whole world is his." The hope of our faith is more than that. Our faith is bigger than that. It's about a world restored to a place of love, a place of sufficiency, a place of well-being for all. The world belongs not to that young man or to any individual, but to all of us, the couple of billion that inhabit it with us. At this time of year, we tell the story of Jesus' struggle with evil while alone in the wilderness. And we can link our own struggles with that. For the early followers of Jesus, for those whom the gospel stories were written, the story of his struggle and vanquishing of evil would have been vindication. He was who the voice of God heard at his baptism said he was, "My son, with whom I'm well pleased." It was a powerful message. But Jesus had to work hard to hold on to the vision of community and human worth in that place of temptations and taunting. We do too, in the face of temptations and taunting. Jesus spent 40 days in that struggle, and 40 days is a long time. But most importantly, perhaps, the invitation and challenge to us of both these important readings is to recall that we are community. And as community, we're invited to be glad we have each other with all our different approaches to life, our different skills, our different insights, and to remember we are people of God. We are the resurrected body of Christ, of which we talk more at Easter. It is important for us to take up the invitation to remember the vision that has inspired us, the big story that shapes us. It's important to remember how we choose to live today will impact on how our children and grandchildren will be able to live in years to come. For we will join their body of ancestors. This is the time for retelling the big story of who we are, a time to retell the myth that shapes how we've chosen to live and which empowers us. It's time to remind ourselves of that world where we can all be loved, have sufficient, live without fear, in safety, and with hope. It is a time to prepare ourselves to struggle against all that entices us to give up that vision, to give up all of it, and to focus just on ourselves now. Today we're going on a picnic to a beautiful place with plenty of food to share. It might not seem to you to be a traditional way to begin Lent, and maybe not. But it is nevertheless appropriate to begin with an opportunity to remember who we are and to knit our body together in community. To remember with gratitude that this land, this people, this faith we share overflows with good things. It's good to remember and to be grateful. I invite you in the 40 days of Lent to remember who you are with honesty, the best and the worst. I encourage you to be aware that the best calls forth gratitude and a generosity of heart and mind in response. And the worst? Well, that's an opportunity to change, knowing that in God, the very breath of life, all things are made new. Amen.